The Colorado mountain air was crisp with the promise of autumn as Emma Collins gripped the steering wheel of her dusty sedan, her knuckles white against the worn leather. Through the windshield, Cedar Valley stretched before her like a postcard. She'd never thought to send herself rolling hills dotted with aspens already turning gold, their leaves catching the late September sun like scattered coins. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Her GPS had lost signal 20 miles back, leaving her to navigate by a hand-drawn map that looked like it belonged in a treasure hunt rather than a legitimate business transaction. In her purse, folded with the care of someone who had read it 100 times, lay the email that had changed everything. The subject line still made her heart race. Your dreams await at Broken Creek Ranch. 6 months of correspondence with someone who claimed to be selling the perfect horse training facility, complete with championship bloodlines and a thriving business. The photographs had shown pristine barns, green pastures, and horses that looked like they'd stepped out of a Western movie. Emma had invested everything her severance package from the marketing firm that had laid her off, her savings, even the small inheritance from her grandmother. $43,000 wired to secure her future as the owner of a Colorado horse ranch, despite having never owned so much as a goldfish. But the seller, a man named Michael Crawford, had been persuasive in his emails, patient with her questions, and understanding of her need for a complete life change after the devastating end of her engagement to Daniel. The gravel road wound higher into the mountains, and Emma's sedan protested with every bump and pothole. She'd expected to meet Crawford at the ranch gate, sign the final papers, and begin her new life as a horse trainer. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd chosen a profession she knew nothing about, but his emails had assured her that the existing staff would teach her everything she needed to know. As the road crested a hill, Emma saw the wooden sign she'd been looking for. Broken Creek Ranch, Est, 1982. But something was wrong. The sign hung at an odd angle, its paint peeling and faded. Below it, a rusted chain stretched across a dirt driveway that looked like it hadn't seen traffic in months. Emma parked beside the chain and stepped out of her car, her city shoes immediately gathering dust. The silence was profound, no horses whinnying, no sounds of ranch activity, no sign of the bustling business she'd been promised. Instead, she found herself staring at a collection of buildings that looked like they'd been abandoned for years. The main house sagged on its foundation, its porch roof partially collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow from winters past. The barns, which had looked so sturdy in the photographs, revealed themselves to be little more than skeletons of rotting wood and rusted metal. Weeds grew shoulder-high in what should have been training paddocks, and a broken windmill creaked mournfully in the mountain breeze. Emma climbed over the chain, her heart sinking with each step. This couldn't be right. Michael Crawford had described a working ranch with 12 horses, modern facilities, and a client list of prominent local families. What she found instead was a graveyard of dreams, a place where hope had come to die alongside someone else's ambitions. She walked the perimeter of the property, her disbelief growing with each revelation. The fencing was down in multiple places, the water troughs were cracked and dry, and the only signs of recent animal activity were the deer tracks crisscrossing the overgrown pastures. In the main barn, which she could enter through a gap where the door had once hung, she found rusted equipment and moldy hay bales that crumbled at her touch. Standing in the ruins of what was supposed to be her future, Emma finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. She had no job to return to in Denver, no apartment. She'd given notice to her landlord just last week. Her savings were gone, transferred to an account that apparently belonged to someone who didn't exist. She was stranded in the Colorado mountains, with a car that was running on fumes and a bank account that contained exactly $47. The sound of an approaching truck made her look up from her contemplation of disaster. A dusty pickup wound its way up the access road, and Emma felt a moment of hope. Perhaps this was Michael Crawford, running late for their meeting, ready to explain why the ranch looked so different from the photographs. But the man who stepped out of the truck wasn't the middle-aged businessman she'd expected to meet. He was younger, maybe 35, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of easy movement that spoke of a lifetime spent outdoors. His jeans were faded but clean, his boots were scuffed but well-maintained, and his hat had the shape that came from years of honest wear rather than fashion consciousness. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed instinctive rather than calculated. "You're trespassing on private property." Emma straightened her shoulders, drawing on reserves of dignity she didn't know she still possessed. "I'm Emma Collins. I'm here to meet Michael Crawford about the ranch purchase. I believe there's been some kind of mistake." The man's expression shifted from stern to something that might have been sympathy. "I'm Caleb Hayes. I keep an eye on this place for the county. And I'm afraid there's been more than a mistake, Miss Collins." The way he said her name, with careful pronunciation and genuine concern, made Emma's composure crack slightly. "I don't understand. I've been corresponding with Mr. Crawford for months. I wired the money last week. The closing was supposed to be today." Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that needed a trim. "Miss Collins, there is no Michael Crawford. This property belongs to the county. Now has for the past 3 years since the owner died and the taxes went unpaid. It's scheduled for auction next month, but nobody expects much interest. Place would need hundreds of thousands in repairs to be functional again." The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She reached into her purse with trembling hands, withdrawing the printed emails that had guided her to this moment. "But look at these. Look at the photographs." He knew about the horses, the training programs, the client lists. How could someone fabricate all of this? Caleb accepted the papers, scanning them with the careful attention of someone who'd dealt with disappointed people before. His frown deepened as he read. "These photos aren't of Broken Creek Ranch. This one here, with the white barns? That's the Sterling place about 15 miles north. This paddock shot looks like it might be from the county fairgrounds in Durango." Emma stared at him, her mind struggling to process the scope of the deception. Someone put together a fake ranch using other people's photographs. "Happens more than you'd think," Caleb said gently. "Con artists target people looking for fresh starts, especially folks from the city who don't know what questions to ask. They piece together convincing stories using real places and stolen photos. By the time victims realize they've been had, the money's long gone and the scammers disappeared." The reality of her situation settled over Emma like a lead blanket. She had been completely, thoroughly, and expensively fooled. Worse than that, she had been fooled because she had wanted so desperately to believe in a different life that she had ignored every red flag, every moment of doubt, every sensible voice that had whispered warnings in the back of her mind. "How much?" Caleb asked quietly. $43,000. The number sounded even more devastating when spoken aloud. "Everything I had. Everything I could get." Caleb's expression darkened. "Christ. I'm sorry, Miss Collins. That's not a small loss." Emma laughed, and the sound held no humor at all. "No, it's not. It's also not recoverable, is it? Men who can create fake ranches and fictional identities don't exactly maintain forwarding addresses. The sheriff might be able to help with a report, get the FBI involved if the money crossed state lines. But recovery," Caleb shook his head, "odds aren't good." They stood in silence for a moment, the mountain wind rustling through the aspen trees that surrounded the abandoned ranch. Emma found herself studying Caleb's face, noting the genuine concern there, the absence of judgment or pity. He looked like a man who understood disappointment, who had perhaps faced his own share of dreams gone sideways. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, Subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Crawford for months. I wired the money last week. The closing was supposed to be today. Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that needed a trim. Miss Collins, there is no Michael Crawford. This property belongs to the county. Now has for the past 3 years since the owner died and the taxes went unpaid. It's scheduled for auction next month, but nobody expects much interest. Place would need hundreds of thousands in repairs to be functional again. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She reached into her purse with trembling hands, withdrawing the printed emails that had guided her to this moment. But look at these. Look at the photographs. He knew about the horses, the training programs, the client lists. How could someone fabricate all of this? Caleb accepted the papers, scanning them with the careful attention of someone who'd dealt with disappointed people before. His frown deepened as he read. These photos aren't of Broken Creek Ranch. This one here, with the white barns? That's the Sterling place about 15 miles north. This paddock shot looks like it might be from the county fairgrounds in Durango. Emma stared at him, her mind struggling to process the scope of the deception. Someone put together a fake ranch using other people's photographs. Happens more than you'd think, Caleb said gently. Con artists target people looking for fresh starts, especially folks from the city who don't know what questions to ask. They piece together convincing stories using real places and stolen photos. By the time victims realize they've been had, the money's long gone and the scammers disappeared. The reality of her situation settled over Emma like a lead blanket. She had been completely, thoroughly, and expensively fooled. Worse than that, she had been fooled because she had wanted so desperately to believe in a different life that she had ignored every red flag, every moment of doubt, every sensible voice that had whispered warnings in the back of her mind. How much? Caleb asked quietly. $43,000. The number sounded even more devastating when spoken aloud. Everything I had. Everything I could get. Caleb's expression darkened. Christ. I'm sorry, Miss Collins. That's not a small loss. Emma laughed, and the sound held no humor at all. No, it's not. It's also not recoverable, is it? Men who can create fake ranches and fictional identities don't exactly maintain forwarding addresses. The sheriff might be able to help with a report, get the FBI involved if the money crossed state lines. But recovery, Caleb shook his head. Odds aren't good. They stood in silence for a moment, the mountain wind rustling through the aspen trees that surrounded the abandoned ranch. Emma found herself studying Caleb's face, noting the genuine concern there, the absence of judgment or pity. He looked like a man who understood disappointment, who had perhaps faced his own share of dreams gone sideways. Caleb, would you be willing to teach me? About horses, I mean. I can't pay much, at least not right now, but I could work. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I learn quickly when I'm motivated. Caleb paused with one foot in his truck, studying. Her face. You're serious. I came here to learn about horses. The ranch was a lie, but that doesn't mean the dream has to be. Maybe I can't own a training facility, but I could still learn the skills. Maybe I could even be useful to someone who actually knows what they're doing. Miss Collins, Emma training. Horses isn't like learning to use a computer program. It's physical work, often dangerous work. It requires knowledge that comes from years of experience, instincts you develop over time. And it doesn't pay well, especially when you're starting out. I'm not looking to get rich, Emma said. I'm looking to build something real. Something that can't be taken away by someone with a fake email address and a convincing story. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face for something she couldn't identify. Finally, he nodded slowly. There's a Mustang sanctuary about 10 miles north of town. They take in wild horses that would otherwise be shipped to slaughter, gentle them, train them for adoption. They're always looking for volunteers. And the Woman who runs it, Sarah Chun, is the best horse trainer I've ever known. If you're serious about learning, that would be the place to start. Would you introduce me? I could do that. But Emma, you need to understand something. Learning to work with horses, really work with them, changes you. It strips away everything false, everything you tell yourself about who you are and what you're capable of. Some people can't handle that kind of honesty. Emma looked back at the ruins of Broken Creek Ranch, at the physical manifestation of her own willingness to believe comfortable lies. I think I've had enough of comfortable illusions. Maybe it's time I learned who I really am. Caleb smiled again, and Emma found herself memorizing the way it changed his entire face. In that case, Miss Emma Collins, I think you and the horses are going to get along just fine. The drive into Cedar Valley took 20 minutes along. Winding mountain roads that revealed new vistas around every curve. Emma followed Caleb's truck, noting how he adjusted his speed for the curves, how he signaled well in advance of turns, how he checked his mirrors regularly to ensure she was keeping up. Even his driving spoke of consideration and competence. Cedar Valley proved to be exactly what Emma had expected from a small Colorado mountain town. A single main street lined with buildings that looked like they'd been constructed sometime between 1920 and 1960. Their false fronts and wooden sidewalks giving the place a timeless quality that Hollywood Westerns had made familiar to anyone who'd ever watched a movie. But unlike the sanitized versions of small-town life she'd seen on screen, Cedar Valley showed the wear and authenticity of a place where real people lived and worked. Rosa's Roadhouse Diner occupied a corner lot, its neon sign advertising home cooking since 1978 in letters that had faded to a warm pink in the mountain sun. Next door, the Cedar Valley Motel offered clean rooms, fair prices in a script that spoke more of honesty than marketing sophistication. Across the street, Mountain View General Store promised everything from fishing tackle to wedding cake, while the Cedar Valley Bank and Trust maintained the solid, reassuring architecture that suggested it had weathered multiple economic storms. Caleb parked in front of the diner and waited for Emma to join him on the wooden sidewalk. Rosa should be able to get you settled at the motel, he said. She owns both places, plus half the other businesses on this street. If anyone can help you figure out your next steps, it's her. The diner's interior was exactly what Emma had hoped for without daring to expect. Red vinyl booths patched with careful stitching, a counter with stools that had been polished smooth by decades of use, and the kind of atmosphere that spoke of community and continuity. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hung in the air like incense, and the soft murmur of conversation from the handful of other customers created a soundtrack of belonging. Rosa Martinez emerged from behind the counter like a force of nature contained in a 5'2" frame. Her dark hair was streaked with premature silver, her apron showed evidence of serious cooking, and her eyes held the kind of shrewd intelligence that Emma associated with successful business owners. "Caleb Hayes," Rosa said, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. "You're early for dinner and too late for lunch. What brings you to town in the middle of the afternoon?" "Rosa, I'd like you to meet Emma Collins. She's had a rough day and could use a friendly face and a place to stay while she figures things out." Rosa's assessment of Emma was swift but not unkind, taking in the city clothes, the dusty shoes, and the carefully controlled expression that suggested someone trying very hard not to fall apart. "Honey, you look like you could use coffee and pie more than anything else. Why don't you sit down and let me take care of you?" The simple offer of care, delivered without questions or conditions, finally cracked Emma's composure. She felt tears threaten and quickly looked away, not wanting to break down in front of strangers who had already shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. "That would be wonderful," she managed. "Thank you." Rosa guided Emma to a booth near the window where she could see the main street and the mountains beyond. Caleb slid into the seat across from her, his presence somehow both reassuring and unsettling. Emma found herself studying his hands as he wrapped them around his coffee cup. Working hands, scarred and calloused, but with the kind of careful precision that spoke of delicate work done with patience and skill. "So," Rosa said, returning with coffee and 2 enormous slices of apple pie, "what's your story, Emma Collins? And don't give me some polite version. I've been feeding people in this town for 25 years, and I can tell when someone's been through the ringer." Emma looked from Rosa to Caleb, weighing how much truth she was ready to share with strangers. But something about their genuine concern, their lack of judgment, made her decide to risk honesty. "I thought I was buying a horse ranch," she said. "Turned out the ranch didn't exist, the seller was a fiction, and I just lost every penny I had to a very sophisticated con artist." Rosa whistled low. "How much?" $43,000. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph." Rosa shook her head. "That's not pocket change, honey. That's life-changing money." "It was supposed to be," Emma agreed. "I was going to start over, learn to train horses, build something real with my own hands. Instead, I'm stranded in a town I've never heard of. With $47 and a car that needs gas I can't afford." Caleb had been quiet during this exchange, but now he leaned forward slightly. "Emma, can I ask what made you want about horses? Most people who get into training have been around animals their whole lives." Emma considered the question, recognizing that her answer would reveal more about her than she was comfortable sharing, but something about Caleb's quiet attention made her want to be truthful. "I used to ride when I was young," she said, "before my parents decided it was too expensive and too dangerous. But I remember the feeling of connection, of partnership, with something wild and beautiful. When my life fell apart in Denver, my job, my engagement, everything I thought I wanted, I kept thinking about that feeling. I thought maybe if I could get back to it, I could find something real again." "What happened in Denver?" Rosa asked. Gently, Emma's laugh was bitter. "I found out my fiancé was sleeping with my boss at the company party in front of half our colleagues. Then the company downsized and I got laid off. So in the space of 2 weeks, I lost my job, my relationship, and most of my friends, who decided they didn't want to choose sides and therefore chose his." "Ouch," Caleb said simply. "Yes, ouch." Emma took a sip of coffee, surprised by how good it was. "So when I saw the listing for Broken Creek Ranch, it seemed like a sign. A chance to start completely over, to build something that would be mine and couldn't be taken away by someone else's betrayal. But it could be taken away by someone else's lies," Rosa pointed out. "Apparently so." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the soft clink of coffee cups and the distant murmur of other conversations. Emma found herself watching Caleb's face, noting the way he seemed to be thinking through her situation, with the same careful attention he might give to a complex problem with a difficult horse. "The Mustang Sanctuary I mentioned," he said finally. "They're always looking for volunteers, but they're also looking for someone to help with their education program. Teaching kids about horses, leading trail rides for visitors, that kind of thing. It doesn't pay much, but it comes with housing a small cabin on the property, and Sarah would teach you everything she knows about training." Emma felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. "Would I be qualified for something like that? Sarah cares more about attitude than experience. And if you're willing to work hard and learn from the ground up, she'd probably take you on." Rosa nodded approvingly. "Sarah Chun's good people. Fair employer, excellent teacher. And the sanctuary's doing important work, saving horses that would otherwise end up in slaughter trucks." "It sounds almost too good to be true," Emma said cautiously. "I've already fallen for one opportunity that seemed perfect. The difference," Caleb said, "is that this is real. I can take you there tomorrow if you want to meet Sarah and see the place for yourself. No money required, no contracts to sign sight unseen. Just an honest conversation about honest work. Emma studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden agendas. But all she saw was genuine concern and what might have been the beginning of respect for her determination to rebuild rather than retreat. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. I could be the worst kind of person, someone who deserved to be cheated." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the same seriousness he seemed to bring to everything. "Because I know what it's like to have your life fall apart," he said finally. "I know what it's like to need a fresh start and not know how to find one. And because the horses taught me that sometimes helping someone else heal is the best way to heal yourself." Rosa reached across the table and patted Emma's hand. "Besides, honey, anybody who's willing to invest their life savings in learning to work with horses can't be all bad. Might be a little crazy, but not bad." Emma laughed, and for the first time since arriving in Colorado, the sound held genuine warmth. "A little crazy might be exactly what I need right now." "In that case," Caleb said, standing and placing money on the table for their coffee and pie, "you're going to fit right in around here. I'll pick you up at 8 tomorrow morning if you want to visit the sanctuary. I'd like that very much." As Caleb left the diner, Emma found herself watching him through the window as he walked to his truck. There was something about the way he moved with unconscious confidence and natural grace that spoke of a man comfortable in his own skin. She wondered what had taught him about having his life fall apart. What losses had given him such empathy for her situation? "He's a good man," Rosa said, following Emma's gaze. "Came back from Afghanistan about 5 years ago with some hard stories and harder lessons. Took him a while to find his footing again, but the horses helped. They always do, if you let them." Emma felt a stir of recognition, understanding now the source of Caleb's quiet competence and underlying sadness. "Military?" "Army. Did 2 tours before an IED ended his service career. Took some shrapnel in his left shoulder, still bothers him when the weather changes. But he came home determined to build something good, something that mattered. The horse training gives him purpose, and helping other people gives him peace. And now he's helping me." "Now he's helping you," Rosa agreed. "Question is, what are you going to do with that help?" Emma considered the question as she looked out at the mountains surrounding Cedar Valley, their peaks touched with the gold of late afternoon sun. 24 hours ago, she had been driving toward what she thought was her dream ranch, full of excitement and nervous anticipation. Now she was sitting in a small-town diner, nearly broke and thoroughly humbled, but somehow not entirely without hope. "I'm going to learn," she said finally. "I'm going to learn everything I can about horses, about training, about building something real. And I'm going to prove to myself that I'm stronger than my worst decisions." Rosa smiled approvingly. "That's the spirit, honey. That's exactly the spirit you're going to need." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Emma Collins sat in Rosa's Roadhouse diner and began to plan her second attempt at starting over. This time she promised herself she would build her new life on truth instead of lies, on earned knowledge instead of wishful thinking, and on the kindness of people who had no reason to help her except that it was the right thing to do. Road to her dreams might have been longer and harder than she had imagined, but for the first time since stepping out of her car at Broken Creek Ranch, Emma began to believe she might actually have the strength to walk it. The morning air carried the scent of pine and possibility as Emma stood outside the Cedar Valley Motel at precisely 8 o'clock, her hands wrapped around a travel mug of Rosa's coffee. She had spent the night in a clean but sparse room, staring at the ceiling and alternating between excitement and terror about what lay ahead. The few belongings she'd brought from Denver were packed in her sedan, ready for whatever came next. Caleb's truck rounded the corner exactly on time, and Emma found herself noting his punctuality as another mark in his favor. In her previous life, she had grown accustomed to people who treated time as a suggestion rather than a commitment. Daniel had been chronically late to everything, a habit she had excused as artistic temperament until she realized it was simply a lack of consideration for anyone else's schedule. "Morning," Caleb said as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Emma replied, settling into the worn bench seat that smelled faintly of leather and hay. "Rosa's motel rooms are surprisingly comfortable. She takes pride in everything she does. Coffee's always fresh, sheets are always clean, and she doesn't tolerate any nonsense from guests who think small-town hospitality means they can get away with poor behavior." The truck's interior was as neat and functional as its owner, with everything in its designated place. A clipboard hung from the visor, covered with notes in Caleb's careful handwriting. The radio was tuned to a country station playing softly, and a thermos of coffee sat in a cup holder that looked like it had been added as an afterthought. "Tell me about Sarah Chun," Emma said as they left town, following a road that wound higher into the mountains. "How do you know her?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel as they navigated a series of switchbacks. "Sarah was the first person who hired me when I came back from overseas. I was pretty messed up, angry at everything and everyone. Traditional therapy wasn't working, and I was starting to think I'd never find my way back to being functional. What changed? Sarah put me to work with a Mustang named Thunder, big black stallion who'd been running wild for most of his life before the Bureau of Land Management rounded up his herd. He was terrified of humans, aggressive when cornered, and had given up hope of ever being safe. Sarah said we'd be good for each other." Emma watched Caleb's profile as he spoke, noting the way his expression softened when he talked about the horses. Was she right? "Took 6 months before Thunder would let me touch him without trying to kick my teeth in. Another 6 months before he'd accept a halter. But somewhere in that process of earning his trust, I started to trust myself again. Learned that patience could be stronger than force, that consistency mattered more than intensity." The road leveled out as they reached a high mountain valley, and Emma caught her first glimpse of Wild Heart's Mustang Sanctuary, the facility. Sprawled across several hundred acres of fenced pasture, with barns and outbuildings arranged in a practical pattern that spoke of thoughtful planning. In the distance, she could see horses grazing in groups, their heads lifting to watch the approaching truck with alert curiosity. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, taking in the sweep of grassland surrounded by pine-covered mountains. "How many horses does Sarah keep here?" "Usually around 60, though the number changes depending on rescue operations and adoptions. She takes in wild horses that would otherwise be shipped to slaughter, gentles them, trains them, and finds them homes with families who understand what they're getting." "And she does all this herself?" "She has a core staff of 4 full-time employees and a rotating group of volunteers. But Sarah makes the final decisions about every horse that comes through here. She can read an animal's history in the way it moves, understand its trauma from how it responds to human contact." They parked near a long, low building that appeared to serve as both office and visitor center. Through the windows, Emma could see walls covered with photographs of horses and their adoptive families, success stories that represented years of patient work and careful matching. Sarah Chun emerged from the building before they had finished climbing out of the truck, and Emma immediately understood why Caleb spoke of her with such respect. She was perhaps 50, with graying black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of working with powerful, unpredictable animals. Her clothes were functional jeans, boots, and a denim shirt that showed evidence of serious work, but she wore them with a natural elegance that suggested she was comfortable in her own skin. "Caleb," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Emma couldn't quite place. "Right on time as always, and you must be Emma." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Sarah's handshake was firm without being aggressive, her dark eyes taking in Emma's appearance with the same assessing gaze Emma had noticed in Rosa and Caleb, but where their evaluations had felt protective. Sarah's felt more clinical, as if she were determining Emma's suitability for work that required specific qualities. "Caleb tells me you're interested in learning about horses," Sarah said. "Walk with me and tell me what that means to you." They set off across the compound, passing corrals where horses stood in small groups, some clearly comfortable with human presence while others maintained a wary distance from the fence line. Emma found herself studying the animals, noting their different postures and expressions, trying to read the stories Caleb had suggested were written in their movements. "I used to ride when I was young," Emma began, then stopped herself. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I took lessons at a fancy stable where everything was controlled and sanitized. The horses were probably wonderful, but I never really knew them as individuals. What I remember is the feeling of partnership, of communicating with something that didn't use words. And now?" Emma considered how much of her story to share, then decided that Sarah's direct manner deserved honest answers. "Now I'm starting over after making some spectacularly poor decisions. I lost my job, my fiancé, and most of my savings to a con artist who convinced me I was buying a horse ranch. But instead of going back to my old life, I want to learn something real, something that can't be taken away by other people's lies or betrayals." Sarah nodded as if Emma's answer had confirmed something she had already suspected. "Horse training isn't therapy, Emma. It's dangerous, demanding work that requires knowledge most people spend decades acquiring. The animals we work with here have been traumatized, abandoned, sometimes abused. They don't have patience for human emotional healing. And they certainly don't care about your financial problems or relationship failures." The blunt assessment stung, but Emma recognized the wisdom in it. "I understand. I'm not looking for therapy disguised as work. I'm looking for work that matters, even if it's harder than anything I've done before." "What have you done before?" "Marketing and public relations for a consulting firm in Denver. Before that, I worked in advertising. I was good at understanding what people wanted to hear and figuring out how to tell them in ways that would make them buy things they didn't necessarily need." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face Emma directly. "And you think working with horses will be different?" "I think horses won't lie to me," Emma said quietly. "I think they'll show me exactly who I am and what I'm capable of, without any of the comfortable illusions I've been living with." For the first time since they'd met, Sarah smiled. "That's the first honest thing anyone has said to me about wanting to work here in months. Most people who volunteer think horses are like dogs with longer legs. They expect gratitude and affection in return for showing up and filling water buckets. What should I expect? Hard work, frustration, occasional moments of connection. That make everything else worthwhile, and the gradual understanding that earning trust is a privilege, not a right." They resumed walking, heading toward a series of paddocks where Emma could see people working with individual horses. Some were leading animals through what appeared to be obstacle courses, while others stood quietly in the center of round pens, seemingly doing nothing while horses circled at various distances. "The education program Caleb mentioned," Sarah said, "involves teaching children and teenagers about natural horsemanship, leading trail rides for visitors, and helping with our adoption events. The pay is minimal, but it comes with housing in one of our staff cabins and the opportunity to learn from people who've been training horses their entire lives. What would you need from me initially? Proof that you can follow instructions without improvisation, stay calm under pressure, and understand that these animals outweigh you by 800 pounds and could kill you accidentally if you make the wrong move at the wrong time." Emma felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. "How do I prove those things?" Sarah gestured toward a nearby round pen where a young woman was working with a paint horse that seemed determined to ignore her completely. "Maria is one of our junior trainers. She's going to evaluate your basic handling skills and your ability to read equine body language. If you pass that assessment, we'll talk about a trial period. And if I don't pass? Then you'll have learned something valuable about yourself and horses, and hopefully you'll understand why we can't risk putting someone inexperienced around traumatized animals. Caleb, who had been quietly observing the conversation, stepped forward. Emma, you don't have to do this if you're having second thoughts. There's no shame in deciding this isn't the right path. Emma looked around the sanctuary, taking in the peaceful scene of horses grazing in mountain pastures and people working with quiet patience and obvious skill. This wasn't the fairy tale ranch she had imagined purchasing, but it was real in ways that Broken Creek Ranch never could have been. I want to try, she said firmly. I want to learn, even if I'm terrible at it initially. Maria proved to be a compact woman in her 20s with the kind of easy competence around horses that spoke of a lifetime spent in their company. Her evaluation began with basic safety procedures: how to approach a horse, where to stand when leading or grooming, how to read signs of anxiety or aggression that might precede dangerous behavior. Horses are prey animals, Maria explained as they stood outside a pen containing a gentle-looking mare named Rosie. Their first instinct is always flight, and when flight isn't possible, they'll fight. Everything we do with them has to account for those instincts. Emma listened carefully, trying to absorb not just the words, but the underlying principles. Working with horses, she was beginning to understand, required a complete shift in thinking. Instead of the direct, goal-oriented approach that had served her well in business, she needed to learn patience, indirection, and the art of invitation rather than demand. Her first attempts at basic tasks were clumsy, but not disastrous. Rosie tolerated Emma's uncertain handling with the patience of a horse accustomed to beginners, though she made her preferences clear through subtle shifts in posture and attention. When Emma stood too close to her hindquarters, Rosie shifted away. When Emma's movements became too quick or abrupt, the mare's head came up in alert tension. She's telling you to slow down, Maria observed. Horses operate on a different timeline than humans. Everything they do is deliberate, considered. If you want to communicate with them, you have to match their pace, not force them to match yours. Emma took a deep breath and consciously slowed her movements, focusing on the rhythm of her own breathing and the horse's responses. Gradually, she began to notice subtle changes in Rosie's demeanor, the softening around her eyes when Emma's energy calmed, the way her ears tracked Emma's position without the sharp alertness that indicated concern. Better, Maria said after an hour of basic exercises. You're listening, which is more than half the battle. Some people never learn to hear what horses are telling them. The evaluation continued with groundwork exercises, teaching Emma to lead a horse through simple maneuvers and obstacles. This required even more patience, as she had to learn to give clear, consistent signals while remaining aware of the horse's emotional state and physical position at all times. Think of it as a conversation, Maria suggested as Emma struggled to guide Rosie around a series of cones. You're not giving orders, you're making requests. The horse always has the right to say no, which means you have to make your requests compelling enough that saying yes feels like the better option. By the end of the morning, Emma was exhausted in ways she hadn't experienced since her college athletics days. Working with horses engaged muscles she'd forgotten she had and required a kind of mental focus that left her feeling drained but oddly satisfied. Sarah appeared as Maria was putting Rosie away, her expression giving nothing away about her assessment of Emma's performance. Walk with me, she said, leading Emma toward a bench overlooking one of the larger pastures. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching a group of mustangs graze in the afternoon sun. Some bore the marks of their wild year scars from predator encounters, the lean build that came from foraging for survival, while others showed the effects of gentling and good care. Maria says you have potential, Sarah said finally. More importantly, she says you listen. That's not a common quality in people who come here wanting to work with horses. Does that mean you'll consider me for the education program position? It means I'll offer you a 2-week trial period. You'll stay in the volunteer cabin, help with daily chores, assist with the education programs, and continue learning basic handling skills. At the end of 2 weeks, we'll evaluate whether this is a good fit for both you and the horses. Emma felt a surge of gratitude that threatened to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure. Thank you. I won't let you down. By mid-morning, Emma's back throbbed from leaning over water troughs, and her arms ached from lugging hay bales. Yet she felt a deep sense of fulfillment she had never found in her former corporate life. Every task served a clear purpose, and each job completed directly improved life for the animal she was caring for. After lunch, her first session with the sanctuary's educational program began when a group of teenagers from a nearby camp arrived to learn the basics of natural horsemanship. Emma's role was mostly to observe, though Sarah encouraged her to engage by asking questions and participating in demonstrations. Natural horsemanship is about understanding how horses communicate with one another, Sarah explained, as the group gathered around a round pen where a calm gelding named Copper stood. Rather than controlling a horse through force or dominance, we learn to use body language, energy, and spatial awareness, their natural form of communication. Emma watched with fascination as Sarah demonstrated. With only small shifts in posture and movement, Sarah was able to direct Copper, guiding him closer or farther, making him speed up or slow down, or even focus entirely on her or lose interest. It was like watching a carefully choreographed dance between partners who instinctively understood one another. Horses are always honest, Sarah said. If they don't respond the way you expect, it usually means your message isn't clear, your energy doesn't line up with your intentions, or you're asking for something they're not ready for. The answer isn't to push harder, it's to communicate better. One of the teens, a restless boy around 16, raised his hand. What if the horse just won't listen? What if he's being stubborn? Sarah smiled. Horses don't really experience stubbornness the way people do. If they don't respond, it's often because they're confused, scared, or physically not able to do what you're asking. It's our responsibility to figure out why and respond appropriately. Emma thought about her own recent struggles with fear and confusion, and how much more progress she had made when people showed her patience and kindness rather than pressure. Maybe the principles of natural horsemanship had lessons beyond just working with horses. That afternoon, Emma had her first hands-on experience with one of the sanctuary's more docile horses, under close supervision. Chester, a senior gelding, with a calm demeanor and a long history of helping volunteers, was her partner. His gentle nature and clear responses made him perfect for beginners. Just be present with him to start, Maria told her as Emma stepped into Chester's paddock. No expectations, no goals. Let him come to you and connect on his terms. Emma stood quietly in the middle of the enclosure, doing her best to project the calm, grounded energy she'd seen in Sarah and Maria. Chester slowly approached, stretching his neck to sniff her, his warm breath brushing her hands. When he allowed her to stroke his neck, Emma felt a deep sense of connection. He's accepting you, Maria noted. Now see if you can encourage him to move with you, not because you're forcing it, but because he trusts your leadership. The next hour tested Emma's patience and her ability to communicate without words. She had to fight her natural impulse to hurry and instead focus on building trust through subtle body cues. Don't overthink it, Maria said gently when Emma started to get flustered. Feel more, think less. Horses respond to real emotion and clear intent. If you're nervous about messing up, Chester will pick up on that and get uneasy too. Eventually, Emma understood what Maria meant. When she stopped trying so hard to control the outcome and simply stayed present with Chester, everything began to flow more naturally. Chester seemed more relaxed, and Emma found herself calming down as well. As the evening settled in and the horses began their nightly routines, Emma reflected on how much she had learned in just one day. The physical challenges were real, but the emotional and mental lessons, patience, communication, and authentic presence felt even more significant. As she finished up the last of her evening tasks, Caleb appeared, leaning on the fence, his own day done. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Tougher than I thought it'd be, but better too," Emma replied. "I used muscles I forgot I had physically and mentally. That's the way this work is," he said thoughtfully. "It pushes you in unexpected ways." He studied her for a moment in the twilight. "Sarah said you did well with Chester. Not everyone connects with him right away. Maria was a great guide, and Chester was forgiving. Horses have a way of drawing out the best in people if you're open to it. They don't care about your past failures or future anxieties. They only care about who you are in the present moment." Emma felt the truth of his words resonate in her chest. For the first time in months, she had spent an entire day without thinking about Daniel's betrayal, her financial losses, or her uncertain future. The horses had demanded her complete attention, leaving no mental space for regret or worry. "Caleb, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "When you came back from Afghanistan, how did you know you were ready to trust people again? How did you know the difference between being cautious and being closed off?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "I'm not sure I do know the difference, even now," he said finally. "But the horses taught me that trust isn't something you decide to do all at once. It's something you build gradually, through consistent actions and honest communication. Each day, you choose to be a little more open, a little more vulnerable, and you see what happens. And if someone betrays that trust, then you hurt. For a while, and eventually you decide whether that person's actions say more about them or about your judgment. Most of the time, it's about them. And you start over, a little wiser, but hopefully not too much more guarded." Emma nodded, understanding that Caleb was sharing hard-won wisdom rather than theoretical advice. "Is that what you're doing with me? Starting over a little wiser?" He turned to look at her directly, his gray eyes serious in the gathering darkness. "Emma, I think we're both starting over. The question is whether we're brave enough to do it together." The words hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither of them was quite ready to examine fully. But Emma felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that her healing journey might not have to be entirely solitary. "I think I'm getting braver every day," she said softly. Caleb smiled, the expression transforming his serious features. "In that case, we're both heading in the right direction." As Emma walked back to her cabin through the cool mountain air, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few days. She had arrived in Colorado as a victim of deception, broken and financially ruined. But somehow, through the kindness of strangers and the honest demands of working with horses, she was beginning to discover strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time since leaving Denver, Emma felt like she was walking towards something meaningful rather than simply running away from her mistakes. And if she was very lucky, she might not have to walk that path alone. 3 weeks into her trial period at Wild Heart's Mustang Sanctuary, Emma was beginning to understand why Sarah had warned her about the complexity of working with traumatized horses. What had initially seemed like straightforward care work had revealed itself as an intricate dance of patience, timing, and intuition that required constant adaptation to each animal's individual needs and moods. The morning brought news that would test everything she had learned so far. Sarah appeared at the volunteer cabin just after dawn, her expression carrying the kind of controlled tension Emma had learned to recognize as a sign of serious problems. "We're getting 12 new rescues today," Sarah announced without preamble. BLM rounded up a herd near the Utah border yesterday. Most are in rough shape, and 3 of them are pregnant mares who could foal any time. I need all hands available, including yours. Emma felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. In her weeks at the sanctuary, she had worked primarily with horses that had already undergone months or years of gentling. Working with truly wild animals would be an entirely different challenge. What do you need me to do? Help Maria prepare the quarantine paddocks, assist with initial health assessments, and observe everything. These horses have never been handled by humans, except during the roundup, which was traumatic. They'll be terrified, defensive, and potentially dangerous. The morning passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Emma helped set up temporary panels to create smaller spaces within the larger paddocks, allowing the new horses to feel secure while still having room to move. Water troughs were filled, hay was distributed, and medical supplies were organized in case any of the animals required immediate treatment. The livestock trailer arrived just before noon, its contents announced by the sound of hooves against metal and the occasional snort of anxiety. As the driver positioned the trailer near the unloading area, Emma could feel the tension radiating from the wild horses inside. "Stay back and stay quiet," Sarah instructed the assembled volunteers. "These animals have been through hell in the past 24 hours. Our job is to make their transition as stress-free as possible." The unloading process was carefully orchestrated, with Sarah and her most experienced handlers managing the actual movement of horses while everyone else maintained supportive positions at a safe distance. Emma watched in fascination as each animal emerged from the trailer, their wild beauty undimmed by their obvious fear and exhaustion. The first horse out was a bay stallion, probably 4 or 5 years old, who exploded from the trailer with such force that he nearly knocked down the handler guiding him. His eyes rolled white with terror as he took in his surroundings, and every muscle in his body spoke of readiness for flight or fight. "That's Ranger," Sarah called out, using the temporary name she assigned to help track the new arrivals. "He's the herd leader, which means he feels responsible for the safety of every other horse that follows him. Until he settles, none of the others will relax." The pregnant mares were handled with extra care, their swollen sides and awkward movements requiring additional time and patience during the unloading process. Emma felt her heart clench as she watched these wild mothers struggling to understand what was happening to them, their protective instincts heightened by pregnancy hormones and the stress of captivity. How long before they begin to trust humans? Emma asked Maria quietly as they watched the last horse settle into its quarantine paddock. "Depends on the individual animal and their experiences before capture. Some of these horses may have had negative encounters with humans in the past, which will complicate the gentling process. Others might be naturally more curious or adaptable. We'll know more in the coming days as they begin to show their personalities." The afternoon brought Emma's first direct involvement with community politics, though she didn't immediately recognize it as such. She was helping Maria distribute afternoon hay when a convoy of expensive vehicles pulled up to the sanctuary's main entrance. 3 black SUVs and a gleaming pickup truck arranged themselves in the parking area with military precision. "Trouble," Maria muttered under her breath. Marcus Sterling and his entourage. Emma had heard Marcus Sterling's name mentioned. Town, always with a mixture of respect and wariness that suggested complicated feelings about the man's influence in Cedar Valley. Now she got her first look at the person behind the reputation. Marcus Sterling stepped out of the lead SUV like a man accustomed to making entrances. He was perhaps 60, with silver hair styled in a way that suggested significant investment in personal grooming. His clothes were expensive but practical, the kind of Western wear that cost more than most people's monthly salary, while appearing appropriately rugged for ranch country. Behind him emerged a woman Emma recognized as Victoria Sterling, Marcus's wife and the unofficial social coordinator for Cedar Valley's elite families. Victoria moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades managing public appearances, her blonde hair perfectly arranged despite the mountain breeze, and her smile ready for deployment at appropriate moments. Sarah appeared from the main office, her expression politely neutral but her posture radiating tension. "Marcus, Victoria. What brings you to Wild Hearts today?" "Sarah, my dear," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the kind of practiced warmth that suggested political experience. "Victoria and I wanted to discuss some exciting developments that could benefit both our operations." Emma found herself studying the dynamics of the conversation, noting the way Marcus positioned himself to appear collaborative, while subtly asserting dominance through his body language and tone. It reminded her uncomfortably of corporate negotiations she had witnessed in Denver, where surface civility masked aggressive territorial behavior. "I'm always interested in beneficial partnerships," Sarah replied carefully. "Though I should mention we're in the middle of processing new rescues, so my time is somewhat limited today." Of course. We wouldn't want to interfere with your important work." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes as he surveyed the sanctuary grounds. "Actually, our proposal relates directly to your rescue operations. Victoria and I have been discussing ways to expand tourism opportunities in Cedar Valley, and we believe Wild Hearts could play a significant role in those plans." Victoria stepped forward, her social skills deploying like a well-rehearsed performance. "We're envisioning guided tours, educational programs for visitors, perhaps even overnight experiences where people could participate in horse training activities. It would bring significant revenue to the sanctuary while showcasing Cedar Valley's Western heritage." Emma watched Sarah's expression carefully, noting the way the sanctuary director's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of overnight experiences did you have in mind?" "Nothing too elaborate initially," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting reasonable compromise while his eyes calculated potential profits. "A few guest cabins, meal service, structured activities that would give visitors an authentic taste of ranch life. We'd handle all the development and marketing, of course. Wild Hearts would simply provide the educational component and, naturally, the horses. And in return, a partnership that would ensure the sanctuary's financial stability for decades to come. No more worrying about donations or grant applications. No more struggling to afford veterinary bills or facility improvements." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from Marcus to Victoria and then to the paddocks where the newly arrived wild horses stood in tense alertness. "That's a generous offer, Marcus. I'll need to consider it carefully before making any decisions." "Of course. Though I should mention that the county commissioners are very enthusiastic about tourism development initiatives. Projects that demonstrate clear economic benefits tend to receive favorable consideration for zoning changes, tax incentives, that sort of thing." The implied threat hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Emma felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the tactics Marcus was employing, the same combination of carrots and sticks she had seen used to pressure small businesses into disadvantageous partnerships with larger corporations. "I appreciate the information, Marcus. As I said, I'll need time to consider all the implications." After the Sterling delegation departed, Sarah stood in the parking area for several minutes, her expression troubled. Emma approached cautiously, unsure whether her input would be welcome in what was obviously a complex situation. "They want to turn this place into a theme park," Sarah said finally, her voice carrying a weariness that spoke of previous battles fought and won considerable. "Cost. Is that necessarily bad? More funding could help more horses." Sarah turned to look at Emma directly, her dark eyes serious. "Emma, do you know why most of these horses ended up needing rescue in the first place? The BLM roundups?" "The roundups are a symptom, not the cause. The real problem is habitat loss, development pressure, and the gradual elimination of wild spaces where these animals can live naturally. Marcus Sterling has been systematically purchasing land throughout this valley for the past decade, converting working ranches into luxury developments and tourist destinations. Emma felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. And now he wants to add wild hearts to his collection. More than that, he wants to transform it into something that serves his vision of what Cedar Valley should become. Guided tours and overnight experiences sound harmless, but they require infrastructure, parking, visitor facilities. Before long, the horses become props in someone else's story instead of the focus of their own rehabilitation. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Caleb's truck, dusty from a day spent working at various ranches throughout the valley. Emma felt her pulse quicken at the sight of him, a reaction she was still learning to interpret. Over the past weeks, their friendship had deepened through shared work and quiet conversations, but she remained uncertain about the nature of her feelings and his intentions. "Saw Sterling's vehicles on my way in," Caleb said as he joined them. "What did he want this time?" "Partnership opportunity," Sarah replied dryly. "Tourism development, overnight guests, the usual transformation of working ranch into entertainment venue." Caleb's expression darkened. He's been making similar offers to every horse operation in the valley. Most have turned him down so far, but the pressure's increasing. Property taxes are going up, feed costs are rising, and some folks are starting to think Sterling's money might be their only option for staying afloat. "What about you?" Emma asked. "Has he approached you about your training business?" "Multiple times. Latest offer was enough to set me up for life, assuming I wanted to spend the rest of my career giving pony rides to tourists and demonstrating rope tricks for entertainment value." The bitterness in his voice revealed depths of frustration Emma hadn't previously recognized. She was beginning to understand that the pressure facing Wild Hearts was part of a larger pattern affecting everyone who worked with horses in Cedar Valley. "There has to be a way to resist this kind of development pressure," she said. In Denver, community organizations sometimes banded together to preserve important spaces or maintain the character of neighborhoods. Sarah and Caleb exchanged glances. That suggested they had discussed similar strategies. "We've tried organizing," Sarah said. "But Marcus has advantages we don't. Political connections, financial resources, the ability to offer immediate solutions to people's economic problems. What we need," Caleb added, "is a way to demonstrate that sustainable horse operations can be economically viable without compromising their core mission. But that requires capital, marketing expertise, and business connections most of us don't have." Emma felt a familiar stirring, the same instinct that had made her successful in marketing and public relations. What if you did have those things? What if there was a way to create a coalition of horse operations that could compete with Sterling's tourism model, while maintaining authentic relationships with the animals? "That's a nice idea in theory," Sarah replied. "But it would require someone with business experience who understood both the horse industry and the tourism market. It would require someone willing to invest significant time and energy in building something from scratch. It would require someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain from making it work," Emma said quietly. The silence that followed her statement felt pregnant with possibility. Emma could see Sarah and Caleb processing her implied offer, weighing her qualifications against the magnitude of the challenge she was suggesting. "Emma," Caleb said carefully, "building that kind of coalition would be a massive undertaking. It would require dealing with difficult personalities, navigating complex politics, and risking failure on a very public scale. It would also require someone who understood that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds aren't favorable." Emma's voice grew stronger as she spoke, conviction replacing uncertainty. "I came here thinking I was going to buy a ranch and learn to train horses. Instead, I got swindled and ended up working as a volunteer. But maybe that was exactly what needed to happen. How do you figure? Because now I understand what's at stake. I've seen how these horses respond to genuine care instead of exploitation. I've learned the difference between authentic partnership and performance for an audience. And I've discovered that I care more about protecting this place and the people who work here than I care about my own comfort or security." Sarah stepped closer, her expression intent. "What exactly are you proposing?" Emma took a deep breath, the plan forming even as she spoke. "A marketing and development campaign that showcases authentic horsemanship as an alternative to Tame. Park entertainment. Educational programs that teach real skills instead of providing superficial experiences. A network of horse operations that support each other economically while maintaining their individual missions." "And you think you could build that?" "I think I could try. I have the marketing background, and I'm learning the horse industry. What I don't have is deep roots in this community or established relationships with the people who would need to participate." Caleb smiled slowly. "That's where you'd need partners who did have those things." "Partners?" "Sarah knows every serious horse trainer in 3 counties. I know the working ranchers and the people who depend on the tourist industry for their livelihoods. Together, we might be able to build something that serves everyone's needs without selling anyone's soul." Emma felt excitement building in her chest, the same thrill she had experienced when developing successful campaigns in her corporate days, but with an additional element she couldn't quite name. This wasn't just about professional achievement. It was about protecting something precious and creating something meaningful. There would be risks, Sarah pointed out. Sterling doesn't like competition, and he has ways of making life difficult for people who oppose his plans. Property taxes, zoning challenges, regulatory inspections, that sort of thing. "Then we'll have to be better prepared than he expects," Emma replied. "More professional, more organized, and more committed to our vision than he is to his." The conversation continued as the sun set behind the mountains. 3 people who had found each other through circumstance, beginning to plan something that could change their entire community. Emma felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since her corporate days, but this time it was grounded in values she truly believed in rather than simply professional ambition. As they talked through initial strategies and potential challenges, Emma became aware that she was no longer thinking of her time at Wild Hearts as temporary. Whether or not the coalition idea succeeded, she had found her place in this mountain valley, working with horses and people who shared her commitment to authenticity over profit. The following week brought the first test of their informal alliance. When Victoria Sterling appeared at the sanctuary unannounced, ostensibly for a social visit, but clearly on a reconnaissance mission. Emma was working with Chester in one of the round pens when Victoria's car pulled up, and she found herself in the position of representing Wild Hearts to someone who might become a significant adversary. "You must be Emma," Victoria said, approaching the pen with the kind of practiced friendliness that suggested extensive experience, managing potentially difficult conversations. "I've heard so much about you from people in town." "All good things." "I hope," Emma replied, continuing to work with Chester while keeping part of her attention on her unexpected visitor. "Oh, absolutely. Rosa Martinez speaks very highly of your dedication to learning about horses. And Caleb Hayes mentioned that you have significant experience in marketing and business development." Emma felt a chill of recognition. Victoria's casual mention of her background suggested that the Sterlings had been making inquiries about the new volunteer at Wild Hearts. The information gathering felt both invasive and strategically purposeful. "I'm enjoying the learning process," Emma said carefully. "Working with horses requires a completely different skill set than I used in my previous career. I imagine it does, though I suspect many of the principles are similar. Understanding your audience, building relationships, creating experiences that meet people's needs." Victoria's words carried multiple layers of meaning, and Emma found herself appreciating the sophistication of the approach, rather than making direct threats or obvious attempts at recruitment. Victoria was exploring Emma's motivations and potential vulnerabilities through seemingly casual conversation. "The horses teach you to be honest about your intentions," Emma replied, using Chester's calm presence to steady her own nerves. They respond to authentic communication and can sense when someone is trying to manipulate rather than connect. How fascinating! And what have they taught you about your own intentions? The question was clearly designed to probe Emma's commitment to wild hearts and her potential openness to alternative opportunities. Emma considered her response carefully, recognizing that her answer would likely be reported back to Marcus Sterling. They've taught me that building trust takes time and consistency, that forcing quick results usually backfires, and that the most rewarding partnerships are based on mutual respect rather than dominance. She paused, meeting Victoria's gaze. Directly, they've also taught me to recognize the difference between genuine offers of partnership and attempts to acquire control through financial pressure. Victoria's smile remained in place, but Emma caught a flicker of respect in her eyes. You're very direct. I appreciate that quality, even when it's directed at me. I find that honesty saves time and prevents misunderstandings. Indeed, it does. Well, Emma, I hope you'll consider joining us for dinner sometime soon. Marcus and I enjoy meeting interesting newcomers to our community, and I think you'd find our perspective on Cedar Valley's future development quite illuminating. The invitation was clearly another form of intelligence gathering, but Emma recognized that accepting might provide valuable insights into the Sterling's actual plans and strategies. That's very kind. I'd be happy to accept when my schedule permits. After Victoria departed, Emma continued working with Chester while processing the encounter. The conversation had confirmed her suspicions about the Sterling's systematic approach to acquiring influence in Cedar Valley, but it had also revealed something she hadn't expected: a grudging respect for direct opposition when it was professionally presented. That evening, she shared the details of Victoria's visit with Sarah and Caleb over dinner at Rose's Diner. The three had fallen into a routine of meeting several times a week to discuss sanctuary business and their developing plans for community organizing. She was fishing for information, Caleb observed after hearing Emma's account. Trying to determine whether you're a potential ally, a manageable opponent, or a serious threat. And what conclusion do you think she reached? Based on what you told her, probably that you're someone worth taking seriously, which could be good or bad, depending on how Marcus chooses to respond. Sarah leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Emma, you handled that conversation exactly right. You were honest without being confrontational, firm without being hostile. But you should know that Victoria will now view you as a key figure in any opposition to their plans. Is that a problem? It means you'll need to be prepared for increased attention from the Sterling organization. They'll want to understand your background, your resources, and your long-term intentions. They might also test your resolve through various forms of pressure. Emma felt a familiar sensation, the same combination of nervousness and excitement she had experienced when taking on challenging accounts in her corporate career. But this time, the stakes felt more personal and the potential rewards more meaningful. Then we'll need to be ready for whatever they throw at us, she said. And we'll need to make sure our alternative vision is compelling enough that people choose it over Sterling's money. Speaking of which, Caleb said, I've been talking to some of the other horse trainers in the valley. There's definitely interest in forming some kind of cooperative organization, but people are nervous about taking on Marcus Sterling directly. What would it take to overcome that nervousness? Proof that our approach could work financially. A demonstration that authentic horsemanship programs could generate sustainable revenue while maintaining their educational and therapeutic value. Emma's mind began working through possibilities, applying her marketing experience to the unique challenges of the horse industry. What if we started small? Developed a pilot program that could serve as a model for larger initiatives? What kind of pilot program? A weekend workshop series, maybe. Authentic horsemanship experiences or something like that. Bring in people who want to learn real skills, not just have their photos taken with pretty horses. Charge enough to demonstrate economic viability, but keep it accessible to people who are genuinely interested in learning. Sarah nodded slowly. That could work. We have the facilities, the expertise, and a growing reputation for quality programs. If we could prove that approach generates better participant satisfaction and word of mouth marketing than Sterling's entertainment model, it might convince other operations to join us. The key would be documentation, Emma continued, her excitement building. Participant feedback, economic data, long-term outcomes. We'd need to prove not just that our approach works, but that it works better than the alternatives. As they continued planning, Emma realized that she was no longer thinking about this project as a way to rebuild her life after disaster. Instead, she was thinking about it as the life she wanted to build, rooted in values she had discovered through her work with horses and relationships with people who shared her commitment to authenticity over profit. The conversation continued late into the evening, three partners developing a strategy that could preserve what they valued most about their community while creating sustainable economic opportunities for everyone involved. Outside Rose's diner, the lights of Cedar Valley twinkled against the dark silhouette of the mountains, and Emma felt a deep sense of belonging she had never experienced in her previous life. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer facing them alone. She had found her place, her purpose, and the people with whom she wanted to build her future. The horses had taught her to trust her instincts, and every instinct she possessed told her that this fight was worth having and this community was worth defending. Emma's phone rang at 5:30 in the morning, jolting her from deep sleep with the kind of urgency that promised bad news. Sarah's voice was tight with controlled panic when Emma answered. "We have a problem. Someone cut the fencing on the north pasture during the night. Half the new rescues are loose in the forest, including 2 of the pregnant mares." Emma was pulling on her boots before Sarah finished speaking, her mind immediately shifting into crisis management mode. "How many are missing?" 7 horses total. The good news is they're likely staying together as a herd. The bad news is there's a storm system moving in from the west, and we need to get them back before the weather hits. I'll be there in 10 minutes. The sanctuary was already buzzing with activity when Emma arrived. Volunteers and staff members preparing for what would clearly be an all-day search and rescue operation. Maria was organizing supplies while other team members checked equipment and studied topographical maps of the surrounding forest. Caleb's truck pulled up just as Emma was helping load rope and emergency veterinary supplies into one of the sanctuary's utility vehicles. His expression was grim as he approached the group. "Saw the cut fencing on my way in," he said without preamble. "Clean cuts, probably bolt cutters. This wasn't accidental damage." The implication hung heavy in the morning air. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the sanctuary's security, endangering the horses and creating exactly the kind of crisis that could damage Wild Heart's reputation and financial stability. "Any idea who might have done this?" Emma asked, though she suspected they all shared the same suspicions. "Could be anyone opposed to our presence here," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Or someone hoping to demonstrate that we can't properly secure dangerous wild animals. Or someone who benefits if Wild Hearts appears incompetent and financially irresponsible," Caleb added with less diplomatic restraint. The search operation divided into 3 teams, each responsible for covering different sections of the mountainous terrain where the horses were likely to have traveled. Emma found herself assigned to Caleb's team, along with Maria and 2 other experienced trackers. "Stay close and follow my lead," Caleb instructed as they set off into the pine forest that bordered the sanctuary's northern boundary. "These horses are already traumatized, and being loose in unfamiliar territory will have them even more on edge. We need to approach them carefully to avoid triggering a stampede that could injure them or scatter them further." The tracking process required skills Emma had never imagined needing. reading subtle signs in disturbed vegetation and soil that indicated the passage of large animals. Caleb moved through the forest with quiet confidence, pausing occasionally to examine broken branches or hoof prints that told the story of the horse's midnight escape. "They're moving uphill," he observed after studying a patch of soft earth, marked with clear tracks. "That's good. Means they're following their instincts to seek high ground where they can see approaching threats. How long can they survive out here on their own?" Emma asked, noting the darkening clouds that were beginning to gather around. "The mountain peaks. These are wild horses, so they know how to find water and forage for food. But they're also stressed, unfamiliar with this specific terrain, and we have 2 pregnant mares who could go into labor at any time. Plus, there are natural hazards up here that domestic horses wouldn't recognize as dangerous." The search continued through the morning, with periodic radio check-ins between the different teams, reporting their progress and sharing information about tracks and possible sightings. Emma found herself impressed by the coordination and professionalism of the operation, recognizing the kind of emergency response capabilities that could only develop through experience with similar crises. "Found them," came Maria's voice over the radio just before noon. "About 2 miles northeast of the sanctuary, in a meadow near Granite Creek. They're staying together as a group, but they're agitated. One of the mares looks like she might be in early labor." The radio crackled with responses from the other search teams as everyone adjusted their positions to support the recovery effort. Emma felt her pulse quicken as she realized they were transitioning from search mode to the much more delicate process of convincing terrified wild horses to voluntarily return to captivity. "This is the tricky part," Caleb explained as they approached the meadow where the escaped horses had taken refuge. "We need to surround them without triggering panic, then slowly guide them back toward the sanctuary using pressure and release techniques." Emma watched in fascination as the experienced handlers positioned themselves around the meadow's perimeter, moving with deliberate patience to avoid startling the already nervous animals. The horses stood in a tight cluster, their heads high and alert, clearly aware of the human presence, but uncertain about whether flight or fight represented their best option. The stallion ranger stood at the front of the group, his body tense with protective aggression as he evaluated the threats surrounding his herd. Emma could see the intelligence in his eyes, the complex calculations of a leader responsible for the safety of animals who depended on his judgment. "Easy, boy," Sarah called softly from her position on the far side of the meadow. "Nobody wants to hurt you. We just want to help you get home safely." The process of moving the horses required almost 2 hours of careful pressure and patient guidance, with the handlers slowly narrowing their circle, while providing clear pathways for the animals to move in the desired direction. Emma found herself assigned to a supporting position, her job to maintain steady pressure without becoming aggressive if the horses tested the boundaries of their containment. "Think like a predator, but don't act like one," Caleb had instructed. "Your presence needs to suggest that staying put isn't comfortable, but moving in our preferred direction offers relief from pressure." Gradually the horses began to move, first in nervous circles within the meadow and then in a more purposeful direction toward the sanctuary. The pregnant mare, who had appeared to be in labor, was moving slowly but steadily, her swollen sides and awkward gait testimony to the physical stress of her condition. "She's definitely contracting," Maria observed during one of their brief rest stops. "We need to get her back to the medical facility as quickly as possible without stressing her further." The return journey took another hour, with the horses moving in a loose formation that allowed them to maintain their social bonds while following the guidance of their human escorts. Emma felt a deep satisfaction as the sanctuary's familiar buildings came into view, knowing that their crisis management had prevented what could have been a disaster for both the animals and the organization. The escaped horses were secured in paddocks closer to the main facilities, where they could be monitored more closely and provided with immediate veterinary care if needed. The pregnant Mare was placed in a special stall equipped with cameras and emergency birthing supplies. Her condition stabilized but still requiring careful observation. "Good work, everyone," Sarah announced as the team gathered for debriefing in the sanctuary's main office. "Professional response, no injuries, all animals recovered safely. This is exactly how emergency operations should function." Emma felt a glow of pride at being included in Sarah's praise, recognizing that she had proven herself capable of handling crisis situations under pressure. But the satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that this emergency had been deliberately created by someone who wanted Wild Hearts to fail. "What's our next step regarding the sabotage?" she asked as the group began to disperse. "Document everything, file a report with the sheriff's office, and improve our security measures," Sarah replied. "Beyond that, we continue operating as professionally as possible and don't give anyone ammunition to use against us." "That's a defensive strategy," Emma pointed out. "What about taking offensive action against whoever did this? Such as..." Emma felt her marketing instincts engaging, the same strategic thinking that had made her successful in her corporate career. "Use this incident to demonstrate exactly what we've been talking about. Show the community how professionally we handle genuine emergencies compared to how our opponents handle manufactured crises." Caleb looked interested. "What do you have in mind?" "A community meeting. Invite everyone who cares about animal welfare and responsible land use. Present the facts about what happened, explain our emergency response procedures, and contrast our approach with the kind of entertainment-focused programs that prioritize profit over animal safety." "That's a risky strategy," Maria observed. "It puts us in direct opposition to Marcus Sterling in a very public way." "We're already in opposition to him," Emma replied. "The only question is whether we're going to be passive victims of his pressure tactics or active advocates for our own vision." Sarah was quiet for several moments, clearly weighing the potential benefits and risks of Emma's proposal. "It would need to be handled very carefully. We'd need factual documentation, professional presentation, and clear articulation of our alternative vision." "I can handle the documentation and presentation," Emma offered. "What I need from the rest of you is community credibility and detailed knowledge of the horse industry issues involved." "When were you thinking of holding this meeting?" "As soon as possible, while this incident is still fresh in people's minds and before Marcus Sterling has time to develop his own narrative about what happened." The decision to move forward with the community meeting was made that afternoon, with Emma taking primary responsibility for organizing the event and developing the presentation materials. She spent the rest of the day creating a detailed timeline of the sabotage incident, documenting the sanctuary's response procedures, and researching comparable incidents at other horse facilities. Her corporate experience proved invaluable as she developed materials that presented complex information in accessible formats, using photographs and charts to illustrate key points while maintaining focus on the broader issues at stake. The presentation took shape as both a defense of Wild Hearts operations and a proactive argument for community-supported horse welfare programs. Caleb stopped by the volunteer cabin that evening to review her draft materials, bringing takeout dinner from Rosa's diner and offering feedback on the technical aspects of her presentation. "This is good work," he said, studying her charts and graphs. "Professional quality, easy to understand, focused on facts rather than emotions. The community will respond well to this approach." "Do you think it will be enough to counter Marcus Sterling's influence?" "That depends on how he chooses to respond. Marcus is smart, politically connected, and experienced at managing public opinion. He won't just sit back and let us control the narrative." Emma felt a familiar thrill of competitive energy, the same sensation she had experienced when developing campaigns to compete against larger, better-funded opponents. "Then we'll need to be smarter, more prepared, and more committed to our message than he is to his." "Emma, can I ask you something?" Of course. Caleb set down the papers he'd been reviewing and looked at her directly. What's driving this for you? The intensity, the willingness to take on fights that aren't necessarily yours to fight. The question caught Emma off guard, forcing her to examine motivations she hadn't fully articulated, even to herself. I'm not sure I know how to answer that. Try. Emma considered her response carefully, recognizing that her answer would reveal something important about her character and her commitment to their shared enterprise. When I first came here, I was running away from a life where I'd been lied to, betrayed, and made to feel foolish for trusting the wrong people. Everything I thought I wanted turned out to be based on deception. And now? Now I've found something real. Work that matters. People who are honest about their motivations and limitations. Animals that respond to authentic communication rather than manipulation. I'm fighting for this because it's the first thing I've ever been part of that I know is worth protecting. Caleb nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without need for additional words. In that case, we'd better make sure we win. The community meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday evening at the Cedar Valley Community Center, a venue large enough to accommodate the expected attendance while maintaining an atmosphere of civic engagement rather than confrontation. Emma spent the week refining her presentation and coordinating with local media to ensure appropriate coverage of the event. Interest in the meeting proved higher than anticipated, with advance RSVPs indicating attendance from ranchers, business owners, environmental advocates, and ordinary citizens concerned about their community's future direction. Emma felt both excited and nervous about the public debut of their coalition's message. The day of the meeting brought unexpected complications when Victoria Sterling appeared at Wild Hearts, just as Emma was loading presentation materials into her car. "Emma, how lovely to see you," Victoria said with the kind of smooth friendliness that immediately put Emma on alert. "I hear you're hosting a community discussion this evening about recent events at the sanctuary." "That's correct. We felt it was important to provide accurate information about our emergency response procedures and our long-term vision for horse welfare programs in Cedar Valley." "How commendable. Marcus and I are very much looking forward to participating in the discussion." Emma felt her stomach tighten at the news that the Sterlings planned to attend, recognizing that their presence would transform the meeting from a supportive presentation into a direct debate between competing visions for the community's future. "Everyone is welcome," she replied carefully. "We're hoping for a constructive dialogue about the best ways to support both animal welfare and economic development in our area. Indeed. Though I hope you're prepared for questions about Wild Heart's financial sustainability and long-term viability. Some community members have expressed concerns about whether volunteer-based operations can provide adequate security and professional management." The comment was clearly designed to rattle Emma's confidence before the meeting, planting doubt about her organization's credibility while positioning the Sterlings as the voice of reasonable concern rather than aggressive opposition. "We're prepared to address any questions about our operations, our qualifications, and our track record," Emma replied. "Transparency and accountability are fundamental to everything we do." Victoria's smile remained in place, but Emma caught a glint of something harder in her eyes. "Excellent. I'm sure this evening will prove very enlightening for everyone involved." As Victoria departed, Emma felt the familiar sensation of preparing for battle, the same combination of nervousness and determination she had experienced before major presentations in her corporate career. But this time, the stakes felt more personal and the potential consequences more significant. The community center was packed when Emma arrived that evening, with every seat occupied and additional people standing along the walls. She recognized faces from around town mixed with others she didn't know, suggesting that word of the meeting had spread beyond Cedar Valley's immediate boundaries. Marcus and Victoria Sterling occupied prominent seats in the front row, their presence creating a subtle but noticeable tension in the room. Emma noted how other attendees seemed to position themselves, either in proximity to or distance from the Sterlings, visual evidence of the community divisions that had brought them all together. Sarah introduced Emma with a brief summary of her background and her role in developing Wild Heart's educational programs, emphasizing her professional qualifications while positioning her as a community member rather than an outsider. The introduction was carefully crafted to establish Emma's credibility without suggesting that the sanctuary needed outside expertise to validate its operations. Emma's presentation began with a detailed account of the recent sabotage incident, using photographs and timeline documentation to demonstrate the sanctuary's professional response to an emergency situation. She presented the information without speculation about who might have been responsible, focusing instead on the capabilities and procedures that had ensured a successful outcome. This incident demonstrates why professional training and emergency preparedness are essential components of any program involving large animals, she explained to the attentive audience. At Wild Hearts, every staff member and volunteer receives training in animal behavior, safety procedures, and crisis response. Our protocols are designed to protect both human and animal welfare under the most challenging circumstances. The presentation continued with data comparing different approaches to horse-based tourism and education, contrasting entertainment-focused programs with skill-based learning experiences. Emma used participant feedback and long-term outcome measurements to demonstrate the superior effectiveness of authentic educational approaches. The question facing our community isn't whether horse-based programs can generate economic benefits, she concluded. The question is what kind of benefits we want to create and what values we want those programs to reflect. Do we want quick profits from superficial entertainment, or sustainable revenue from meaningful education that builds lasting connections between people and animals? The question and answer period that followed revealed the depth of community division about Cedar Valley's future direction. Ranchers expressed concerns about maintaining their traditional way of life, business owners worried about economic opportunities, and environmental advocates emphasized the importance of protecting natural habitats. Marcus Sterling's questions were professionally delivered, but clearly designed to undermine confidence in Wild Heart's approach. Miss Collins, while your presentation is impressive, I'm concerned about the financial sustainability of programs that depend primarily on volunteer labor and charitable donations. How can the community rely on organizations that might not exist in 5 years if funding sources dry up? Emma had anticipated this line of attack and was prepared with specific financial data. Mr. Sterling, Wild Hearts has maintained consistent operations for over a decade, with diversified funding sources including educational program fees, adoption services, and strategic partnerships with veterinary schools and research institutions. Our financial model is actually more stable than enterprises that depend on tourism revenue, which can fluctuate dramatically based on economic conditions and changing travel patterns. But surely you'd agree that professional development and increased investment could enhance your program's effectiveness and reach. Absolutely. That's why we're proposing a coalition of horse operations that can share resources, coordinate marketing efforts, and maintain high professional standards while preserving their individual missions and values. The exchange continued for several more rounds, with Emma maintaining her focus on factual information and positive vision while Marcus attempted to highlight potential weaknesses and limitations in her organization's approach. The audience followed the debate with obvious interest, and Emma could sense the room's energy shifting as people evaluated the competing arguments. The meeting's turning point came when an unexpected voice entered the discussion. Tom Rodriguez, a local rancher Emma had met briefly at Rose's Diner, stood up from his seat near the back of the room. "I've got a question for both sides," Tom announced, his weathered face serious. "My family's been ranching in this valley for 3 generations. We've seen boom and bust cycles, droughts and floods, good years and bad years. What we've learned is that the operations that survive are the ones that stay true to their core values while adapting to changing circumstances. He paused, looking first at Marcus Sterling and then at Emma. Mr. Sterling, your development projects bring money to the valley, no question about that. But they also change the character of this place in permanent ways. Once you turn working ranches into entertainment venues, you can't easily turn them back. Emma felt her pulse quicken as she realized Tom was articulating concerns she had sensed, but hadn't known how to address directly. Miss Collins, Tom continued, your coalition idea sounds good in theory, but it would require people like me to trust that city folks understand what we're trying to preserve out here. That's a hard sell for someone who's seen too many outside. Experts come in with grand plans that don't account for local realities. The challenge was fair and direct, requiring Emma to address the fundamental question of whether her outsider status disqualified her from leadership in community preservation efforts. Tom, you're absolutely right to be skeptical, she replied. I am an outsider, and I don't have generations of history in Cedar Valley. What I do have is experience with the consequences of choosing short-term profits over long-term sustainability. In my previous career, I watched too many good organizations get destroyed by people who promised immediate solutions to complex problems. She paused, looking around the room at faces that had become familiar over her weeks in the community. I can't claim to understand all the challenges facing ranchers and horse operations in this valley, but I can offer skills and resources to support people who do understand those challenges and want to preserve what's valuable about this way of life. Tom nodded slowly, his expression suggesting cautious approval. That's a fair answer. Question is, what happens when your good intentions run up against the reality of Marcus Sterling's political connections and financial resources? The question hung in the air like a challenge, requiring Emma to demonstrate confidence in her coalition's ability to compete with more established power structures. Then we'll find out whether this community values authenticity enough to support it over convenience, she replied. Because at the end of the day, that's what this choice comes down to. Do we want to preserve the real thing, with all its complications and challenges, or do we want to settle for a sanitized version that's easier to market, but doesn't contain the values that made this place worth preserving in the first place? The meeting concluded with commitments from several local horse operations to participate in planning sessions for the proposed coalition, while others reserved judgment pending more detailed information about the structure and goals of the organization. Emma felt cautiously optimistic about the response, recognizing that she had succeeded in framing the debate in terms that resonated with community values. As people filed out of the community center, Caleb appeared at Emma's side, his expression mixing pride and concern. You did well up there. Professional, prepared, and authentic. The community responded to that combination. But Marcus Sterling looked like a man developing a strategy rather than someone who'd been defeated by superior arguments. This was just the opening round of what's going to be a longer fight. Emma nodded, understanding that the real test of their coalition would come in the weeks and months ahead as they attempted to transform good intentions into effective action. But for the first time since arriving in Cedar Valley, she felt confident that she was fighting for something worth defending, alongside people who shared her commitment to preserving what mattered most. Whatever challenges Marcus Sterling might devise, Emma Collins was no longer an isolated individual trying to rebuild her life after disaster. She was part of a community with skills and resources that could make a difference, fighting for values she truly believed in alongside people she had learned to trust and respect. The phone call came at dawn on a Tuesday morning in late October, 3 weeks after the community meeting had established battle lines between Emma's coalition and Marcus Sterling's development plans. Emma recognized Sheriff Tom Mitchell's voice immediately, though she had never heard him sound so grim. Emma, I need you to get down to the sanctuary right away. We've got a situation that requires your immediate attention. What kind of situation? The kind that could shut down wild hearts permanently if it's not handled exactly right. I'm on my way there now. Emma's blood ran cold as she dressed hastily and drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward the sanctuary. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. Another sabotage incident? An injury to one of the volunteers? Some kind of regulatory violation that Marcus Sterling had orchestrated? The answer proved to be worse than any of her anxious speculations. As she pulled into the sanctuary's parking area, Emma saw Sheriff Mitchell's patrol car alongside vehicles from the county health department, the state veterinary office, and what appeared to be federal wildlife enforcement. Sarah stood near the main office, her face pale with controlled fury as she spoke with a man in a dark suit who was taking notes on an official-looking clipboard. "Emma, thank God you're here," Sarah called out as she approached the group. "We need someone with legal and business experience to help us navigate this bureaucratic nightmare." The man with the clipboard introduced himself as Dr. Raymond Walsh from the Colorado Department of Agriculture, and his presence explained the gravity of the situation facing wild hearts. Dr. Walsh was conducting an unscheduled inspection of the sanctuary's operations, focusing specifically on their handling of recently rescued wild horses. "Miss Collins, I presume," Dr. Walsh said, his tone suggesting he had been expecting her arrival. "I understand you've been serving as a liaison between this facility and various community organizations. I help coordinate educational programs and community outreach," Emma replied carefully, recognizing that her words were being evaluated for their legal implications. "What exactly are you investigating this morning?" Emma asked. Dr. Walsh glanced at his clipboard, moving with the deliberate precision of someone following a formal checklist. "We've received complaints that Wild Heart's Mustang Sanctuary may be operating beyond the limits of its permits," he said. "Specifically, that it is housing and training animals that are supposed to be managed only by federal authorities." Emma's stomach turned. Marcus Sterling had made his move, and it was a direct hit. By questioning their right to work with BLM Mustangs, he was threatening the foundation of everything they had built. "What documents do you need to confirm that we're in compliance with all relevant regulations?" she asked, quickly switching into the composed, tactical mindset she had honed during corporate crises. "We need full records on every horse currently at the facility," he said. "That includes documentation of how they were acquired, their medical histories, training records, and adoption or placement plans. Federal guidelines are strict, and any deviation is considered a serious offense." Sarah and Emma exchanged a knowing look. While Wild Hearts kept thorough records, the federal rules around wild horse care were notoriously complex, leaving room for interpretation, especially by an inspector with an agenda. "Our records are complete and ready for inspection," Sarah said firmly. "But I'd like to know more about the complaints themselves. Who filed them? And what kind of evidence are they claiming?" Dr. Walsh's expression remained neutral, but Emma noticed a trace of unease. He wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. "The complaints came in anonymously via our online reporting system," he replied. "They included photos and detailed notes suggesting a strong understanding of your operations." The message was clear. Someone with inside access had been collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to strike. Emma's mind raced through the list of volunteers and recent visitors, wondering which of them had been feeding information to Marcus Sterling. The inspection consumed the entire morning. Dr. Walsh went through every aspect of their work methodically while Emma and Sarah explained procedures and handed over documentation. Emma leaned on her experience navigating regulatory red tape, anticipating his concerns and offering detailed explanations before they became issues. "Your training protocols actually exceed federal minimums," Dr. Walsh said as he flipped through Maria's logs. "But some of this work might be considered beyond the allowed scope for preparing Mustangs for adoption." "In what way?" Emma asked, though she had a hunch where he was going. Federal guidelines state that BLM Mustangs should only be trained enough to make them adoptable. Programs that go further teaching advanced skills or creating emotional bonds could be interpreted as overstepping. Emma felt a wave of anger. Sterling had framed their most compassionate practices as violations. Wild Heart's comprehensive rehabilitation work was being twisted into known compliance, while Sterling's bare minimum training methods were being positioned as the legal standard. With all due respect, Dr. Walsh, those regulations were meant to prevent exploitation of wild horses, she said, carefully keeping her voice steady. Our extended training ensures these animals are well adjusted and less likely to be returned or mistreated. It's about setting them up for successful lasting adoption. Your intentions may be good, Ms. Collins, he said. But compliance isn't about intentions. It's about adhering to what the regulations actually permit. Throughout the afternoon, the inspection continued. Dr. Walsh noted technical violations where Wild Heart's high standards went beyond legal requirements. Emma documented everything meticulously, knowing that how they responded would make or break not only the sanctuary, but also the broader movement they represented. By the end of the day, Dr. Walsh handed Sarah a formal order. All training with BLM Mustangs was to be suspended pending a full review. The halt effectively shut down their rescue and adoption operations and cut off their main revenue stream. How long will the review take? Sarah asked, trying to mask her rising anxiety. Generally 6 to 8 months, assuming documentation is submitted promptly and no further violations are found, he replied. Emma felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. Sterling's strategy was cunning. Even if they cleared their name, it would take so long that their funds would run dry, staff would move on, and community support would fade. The sanctuary would be forced to close, removing the last real obstacle to Sterling's tourism project. After Walsh left, Emma, Sarah, and Caleb gathered in the office to face the reality of their situation. The mood was heavy as they reviewed their finances and weighed their options. We can probably make it 3 more months without income from the programs, Sarah said, scanning their financials. After that, we'll have to start making some painful decisions about which horses we can afford to keep and which ones we'll have to place elsewhere. They represent fundamental failures to comply with federal statutes that carry significant legal and financial penalties, including potential criminal prosecution for responsible parties. Commissioner Janet Hopkins, a longtime advocate for environmental protection, leaned forward with obvious interest. Miss Collins, are you alleging that these violations are ongoing, or are they historical issues that may have already been addressed? Ongoing, Commissioner Hopkins. The septic discharge into Granite Creek watershed continues daily. The unauthorized motorized access in designated wilderness areas continues to operate under current business licenses, and the destruction of archaeological sites continues with each new phase of development. Emma could see Marcus Sterling conferring urgently with Victoria, their whispered conversation suggesting frantic calculation of damage control options. But the documentation she had assembled was too comprehensive and professional to be dismissed as the accusations of a disgruntled competitor. What specific action are you requesting from this commission? Asked Commissioner Robert Chun, his tone suggesting serious attention to her presentation. Immediate referral to appropriate federal agencies for investigation, temporary suspension of any county permits for Sterling development projects, pending resolution of federal compliance issues, and establishment of enhanced oversight procedures to prevent future violations of environmental protection statutes. The commissioners voted unanimously to refer Emma's documentation to federal authorities and to suspend approval of any new Sterling development projects pending investigation. Outcomes. Marcus Sterling left the meeting without comment, but his expression promised retaliation for the devastating reversal of his political position. The federal investigations that followed moved with surprising speed, driven by the comprehensive documentation Emma had provided and the serious nature of the violations involved. Within 2 weeks, multiple federal agencies had launched coordinated inquiries into Sterling's operations, while state regulators initiated their own reviews of permits and compliance issues. The impact on Wild Hearts was immediate and dramatic. Dr. Walsh contacted Sarah to inform her that the regulatory review of the sanctuary's operations had been expedited and resolved in their favor, with Wild Hearts receiving official commendation for exceeding federal standards in animal care and training procedures. It appears that the original complaints against your facility were filed in bad faith, Dr. Walsh explained during his follow-up visit. The photographic evidence that was submitted had been deliberately misrepresented to suggest violations that don't actually exist. Federal investigators are now looking into potential criminal charges for filing false regulatory complaints. Emma felt a deep satisfaction as she realized that Marcus Sterling's attack on Wild Hearts had not only failed, but had ultimately led to the exposure of his own far more serious violations. The man who had tried to destroy their organization through regulatory manipulation was now facing the prospect of federal prosecution for environmental crimes. The community response to these revelations transformed the political landscape of Cedar Valley overnight. Business owners who had been intimidated by Sterling's financial power began speaking openly about their concerns regarding his development practices. Ranchers who had been pressured to sell their properties withdrew from negotiations with Sterling Development. Environmental groups that had been ineffective against Sterling's political connections suddenly found themselves with powerful federal allies. Emma's coalition of horse operations evolved rapidly from a defensive organization protecting against Sterling's pressure into a proactive force shaping Cedar Valley's future development policies. The success of their resistance had demonstrated that professional organization and principled advocacy could compete effectively with raw financial power and political connections. 3 months after the regulatory battle had begun, Emma stood in the round pen at Wild Hearts, working with Thunder, the black stallion who had been Caleb's rehabilitation project years earlier. The horse's willingness to accept her guidance represented a level of trust and partnership that she could never have imagined during her first desperate days in Colorado. "You've come a long way since that first day with Chester," Caleb observed, leaning against the fence as he watched her work with the magnificent animal. "We all have. Thunder, me, the sanctuary, the whole community. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Thomas Fletcher had actually existed and I'd gotten the ranch I thought I was buying. You'd probably be struggling alone, trying to figure out horse training without any of the support systems you've built here. The fraud that brought you to Cedar Valley might have been the best thing that ever happened to you." Emma guided Thunder through a series of movements that demonstrated the deep communication possible between human and horse when both partners approached the relationship with honesty and respect. "I think you're right. I came here looking for a fantasy ranch and a simple solution to my problems. Instead, I found real work, authentic relationships, and a purpose worth fighting for." "Speaking of authentic relationships," Caleb said, his tone shifting slightly, "there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Emma felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the change in his voice, the same careful intensity she had noticed during their most personal conversations. "What's that?" "The other night, when we were planning the coalition's expansion into other counties, you mentioned wanting to make your commitment to Cedar Valley permanent. I've been wondering what that means to you." Emma brought Thunder to a halt in the center of the pen, her attention divided between the horse's calm presence and Caleb's serious expression. "It means I'm done looking for somewhere else to be. This is where I belong, doing this work with these people. With you, if you're interested in that kind of permanence." Caleb opened the gate and stepped into the pen, approaching both Emma and Thunder with the same careful respect he showed all living creatures. "Emma, I've been thinking about something you said during one of our first conversations. About horses teaching people to be honest about their intentions. I remember. Well, I want to be completely honest about mine. I'm in love with you. Crawford for months. I wired the money last week. The closing was supposed to be today. Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through dark hair that needed a trim. Miss Collins, there is no Michael Crawford. This property belongs to the county. Now has for the past 3 years since the owner died and the taxes went unpaid. It's scheduled for auction next month, but nobody expects much interest. Place would need hundreds of thousands in repairs to be functional again. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. She reached into her purse with trembling hands, withdrawing the printed emails that had guided her to this moment. But look at these. Look at the photographs. He knew about the horses, the training programs, the client lists. How could someone fabricate all of this? Caleb accepted the papers, scanning them with the careful attention of someone who'd dealt with disappointed people before. His frown deepened as he read. These photos aren't of Broken Creek Ranch. This one here, with the white barns? That's the Sterling place about 15 miles north. This paddock shot looks like it might be from the county fairgrounds in Durango. Emma stared at him, her mind struggling to process the scope of the deception. Someone put together a fake ranch using other people's photographs. Happens more than you'd think, Caleb said gently. Con artists target people looking for fresh starts, especially folks from the city who don't know what questions to ask. They piece together convincing stories using real places and stolen photos. By the time victims realize they've been had, the money's long gone and the scammers disappeared. The reality of her situation settled over Emma like a lead blanket. She had been completely, thoroughly, and expensively fooled. Worse than that, she had been fooled because she had wanted so desperately to believe in a different life that she had ignored every red flag. Every moment of doubt, every sensible voice that had whispered warnings in the back of her mind. How much? Caleb asked quietly. $43,000. The number sounded even more devastating when spoken aloud. Everything I had. Everything I could get. Caleb's expression darkened. Christ. I'm sorry, Miss Collins. That's not a small loss. Emma laughed, and the sound held no humor at all. No, it's not. It's also not recoverable, is it? Men who can create fake ranches and fictional identities don't exactly maintain forwarding addresses. The sheriff might be able to help with a report, get the FBI involved if the money crossed state lines. But recovery, Caleb shook his head. Odds aren't good. They stood in silence for a moment, the mountain wind rustling through the aspen trees that surrounded the abandoned ranch. Emma found herself studying Caleb's face, noting the genuine concern there, the absence of judgment or pity. He looked like a man who understood disappointment, who had perhaps faced his own share of dreams gone sideways. Not just attracted to you, not just grateful for everything you've done for the sanctuary and the community, but genuinely, completely in love with who you are and who you're becoming. Emma felt her heart skip as she heard the words she had hoped for, but hadn't dared to expect. Caleb, let me finish, he interrupted gently. I know we both came to this relationship carrying damage from our pasts. I know we're both cautious about trusting our judgment when it comes to love. But I also know that what we've built, together, personally and professionally, is real in ways that can't be faked or manipulated. Emma reached out to touch his face, marveling at the combination of strength and gentleness she found there. You want to know what thunder taught me today? What's that? That trust isn't something you decide to give all at once. It's something you build gradually, through consistent actions and honest communication. And that's sometimes the most. Damaged creatures just need someone to believe they're worth saving. Caleb smiled, understanding her meaning without need for additional explanation. So what are you saying, Emma Collins? Emma looked around the sanctuary that had become her home. at the horses that had taught her about authentic communication, at the man who had shown her that partnership could be based on mutual respect, rather than control or manipulation. I'm saying I'd like to build something permanent with you. Not just a business partnership, but a life partnership. Here, with these horses in this community we've helped preserve. Are you sure? Because once you commit to staying in Cedar Valley permanently, there's no going back to your old life in Denver. This is small-town living, hard work, and the kind of challenges that don't come with corporate health benefits or retirement plans. Emma laughed, remembering her first desperate arrival in Colorado and comparing it to the confidence and purpose she felt now. Caleb, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I came here looking for a fictional rancher who would give me a ready-made life. Instead, I found a real cowboy who helped me build an authentic life with my own hands. In that case, Caleb said, pulling her closer while Thunder stood patiently nearby, I have a question to ask you. Emma Collins, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in all things forever? Emma felt tears of joy welling in her eyes, as she realized that the life she was choosing was far better than anything she could have imagined when she first stepped off that stagecoach of broken dreams. Yes, Caleb Hayes, I will marry you, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that some partnerships are worth any amount of risk. As they kissed in the round pen, surrounded by the horses that had taught them both about trust and healing, Emma felt the last pieces of her new life falling into place. She had arrived in Cedar Valley as a victim of deception, but she was staying as a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her home. Thunder nickered softly, as if offering his approval of their partnership, and Emma laughed with pure happiness. She had finally learned to tame her heart, not by suppressing her capacity for love and trust, but by choosing carefully who deserved those precious gifts. And in return, she had found a gentle cowboy who smiled when she whispered her deepest truths, who had helped her build something real from the ashes of her beautiful delusions. The future stretched before them like the Colorado mountains at sunset, full of challenges and beauty in equal measure, but no longer something to be faced alone. Together, they would continue the work of healing damaged creatures and preserving authentic relationships in a world that too often chose convenience over truth. And every day, the horses would remind them that the most valuable partnerships are built on honesty, patience, and the courage to trust again after betrayal. Emma Collins had finally found her home, not in the fantasy ranch that had never existed, but in the real work of building something meaningful with people who shared her values and her commitment to authentic living. She had tamed her heart like Caleb had tamed his horses, not through force or control, but through gentle persistence and the faith that some bonds, once properly established, could weather any storm. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.